Martin, hi. It's great to see you again.
Great to see you.
Okay, so I'm very excited that you have now published your first book, and it's based on your approach to all things business and humanity. Can you tell me a little bit about your latest endeavor here?
Well, it's called Optimize the Moment. It's about my journey. It's about a journey over the last 25 years or so. It starts back, before 9/11. I started in business in the financial services sector. I worked for a firm called Merrill Lynch. At the time, it was the largest financial services firm in the world. Great company, great organization to work with. They were terrific to me. Lots of great training. I learned lots about markets and technical analysis and fundamental analysis and all sorts of things. But I also learned a lot about people and not only managing their wealth, but also psychology and that relationship between money and people and their psychology and their attitudes towards money and listening to people. And it really was a terrific experience. I would probably still be working for Merrill Lynch today had 9/11 not happened. But it did. It changed the course of history, and it certainly changed my life in the course of my trajectory. And I was subsequently given the opportunity to go overseas and work in the field of governance and track 2 diplomacy and working in other countries doing negotiations and capacity building. And that really started my path towards what is Optimize the Moment and the approach that followed.
What I find interesting about this, Martin, is I've known you for quite a few years, and I did not know this about you. You're very humble and have a great sense of humility with what you've done in the past. So this is an exciting new chapter for me, getting to know this part of you with your book. I want to touch on, you've talked about Merrill Lynch occasionally as a place where they had a very defined mission, and that seems to be the blueprint that has given you your approach on optimizing the moment. Can you just share a little bit about that? I'd like to understand it a little bit more.
Sure. Well, I advise a lot of great companies, and there are a lot of great companies that get it right, and there are many other companies that have a long way to go. Merrill Lynch was one of the companies I felt that got it right in a number of ways, and they had a set of principles that hung on the wall, and management, the leadership of the company, used to manage by that set of principles. Respect for the individual, clients first, a lot of those things that companies today talk about, but they don't necessarily actually lead by example in those ways. For example, if one of the senior producers did something that was against the principles that hung on the wall, they were marched out the door. And they were marched out the door very loudly, very publicly. And everybody in the company knew why they were marched out the door. And what that did was send a message to all of us in the firm, but all on the street. Everybody knew why. That those principles that hung on the wall were not there for marketing purposes. They were there as a way to guide the company. They set the mission for the firm. They set the direction for the firm. And it sent the message that no matter how much money any one individual made for the firm, it didn't matter. No one individual was bigger than the firm, the reputation of the firm, and the principles that they stood by. And so for every individual who got marched out of the firm that way, the next day there would be 10 more from our competitors lined up to join the firm because they wanted to be part of a company that was led that way and actually walked the walk.
The courage of conviction.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
And that really did set, I didn't know at the time, but it set the foundation for the Optimize the Moment approach and how I certainly did business going forward and the opportunities that came along.
So I'm thinking if my son is listening to this, he's probably going to think that's a pretty harsh approach because, the younger generation has had, it seems to me, in our society anyway, fewer consequences. But what you're saying is that this created a standard of excellence that was aspirational to people, held them accountable, delivered a measure of transparency because they were fully aligned with what the organization stood for. And it was a privilege to work there and an opportunity. what do you say to that? It's just what I'm thinking in my head when you talk about that.
Absolutely. I mean, this was literally the largest investment firm in the world, not just on Wall Street, but in the world. And Wall Street has not exactly had a great reputation for, being ethical and doing things by a standard of excellence. So here was a company that was not willing to bend the rules or bend their principles just because somebody made them a lot of money on any given day or in any given quarter. So it really did set an example. So it does go to show that no matter how big the firm or how big any given producer, it can set a bar. So today, there are lessons to be learned from that. As I said, there are a lot of great companies who get it right, but there are a lot of companies today who certainly appear willing to bend the rules, bend their ethics, bend their principles in order for a producer or an individual who's willing to make money on any given day. So when I advise clients and I advise companies, I'm the first one to say, it doesn't have to be that way. You can set the principles, you can set the bar high. There is a better way of doing business.
Yeah. It's just funny just to kind of get straight about this. There's a documentary coming out called Movie Pass, and it basically is the antithesis of everything that you're saying Merrill Lynch is when they describe, the level of opaqueness at the top and not being able to live by a certain standard and maintain a healthy culture, which is what you focus on all the time. It's the culture and the team building. But I just want to back up a little bit again to 9/11, because that is a very significant event in our recent history. And the cover of your book has the Twin Towers on one side, and then you see the spire here, and then they're gone.
And they're gone.
And so when you talked about psychology as well, can you share a little bit about the personal impact of that on you?
Oh, sure. As I said, I was working for Merrill Lynch, leading up to and through that period of time. I was part of an international managers program. There were 16 of us at the time, and we were destined to go and run a business unit for Merrill Lynch somewhere in the world. And I was right at that cusp, right at that point in time when the 16 of us were all about to go and do something. And I was in New York. I was there at the time. I had not been feeling well the week before, and I thought I could shake it off that weekend right before 9/11. And on the Monday, I decided that I was just going to go home.
Home being in Canada.
Home being in Canada, London, Ontario. And so I got on a plane, went to LaGuardia, and got on a plane and flew home. And as we all know, Tuesday morning the attacks occurred. I should point out that I had been living and working in the World Trade Center in the Marriott Hotel, which had occupied the first 22 floors of the World Trade Center. So it was very near and dear to my heart. Merrill Lynch lost 348 people that day, I believe, if I'm correct. A number of colleagues, and it was very personal, of course, that day for a lot of people, not just for me. Everybody, of course, has their own story that day. Mm-hmm. But it changed obviously the course of history, as I said, but it changed the organization. The Merrill Lynch Towers directly across the street. And so as the towers came down, it locked in the leadership of the company that day. They moved the trading floors to Princeton, not only for Merrill Lynch, but for all our competitors as well.
Keep the economy moving.
To keep the money moving, to keep the economy moving. It was a pivotal moment in our economy, the world's economy, those next few weeks. And Merrill Lynch chose, obviously the belief was that America was under attack. Mm-hmm. And so the board decided to focus on U.S. domestic and sold off those international business units that I'd been a part of. So I woke up one day working for a Canadian bank instead of the Merrill Lynch organization that I'd been a part of.
So that is interesting. Is that the first kind of, you had the confluence of two things there. One is an existential moment, because had you stayed there and had not been feeling well, I'm sure this has played in your mind, many times, you may well have been in bed that morning.
Absolutely.
And the second point is that you had a leadership team that had to make snap decisions. And I imagine there's a lot of instinct there, but instinct usually is at that level, you need to be informed with the right intelligence and data. How did that change your approach? Because that is really optimizing the moment.
So it's a theme that plays out throughout the book. And maybe what I'll do is shift a little bit, because I then went on to work in war zones
Yeah.
and post-conflict zones with people who were in those moments, and over many years, and working with people in the crucible, if you will, of those very intense moments of decision making. You talk about the gut instinct, the reaction moment. And I've learned a lot about those moments and how people make decisions in those moments. It is very guttural. It is very instinctual. But there are also those moments when you rely very much on your training and the preparedness that comes beforehand. It is all of those moments of crisis, let's call it what it is. It is really the culmination of all of the experiences that you've had before come together in that instance. So that gut instinct, if you will, is in a moment the reflection of all of the experience. People talk about their lives flashing before their eyes.
Yeah.
So when I say it is the culmination of their life's experiences happening in that instance, some people talk about, their gut instinct and their gut reaction, and it often is. Hopefully, and people in the military talk about this, it is that training that kind of overrides. It is that
Yes.
in that moment, they know instinctively what to do. They rely on their training and their preparedness in those moments. So when they are under fire, for instance, they don't kind of curl up in a corner and react, by doing what would be human reaction to
Mere mortals would do.
curl up in a corner and suck
It's
their
flight
thumb.
or fright, yeah.
Right, but they don't, right? They rely on their training. They know exactly what to do, and they follow step A, step B, step C. Quite often, I have been absolutely marveled and humbled by people, very average people, ordinary people, normal people like us, who have in those moments not curled up in a corner, not reacted, and instead stepped up and done some truly remarkable things. And not just survived, but in fact led others, and led others through some truly horrifying and crazy moments, to go on and do some incredible things. And that's why the book is called Optimize the Moment. It's not called Survive the Crisis. It could have been. I could have told all sorts of stories about crises and different things that have happened. But those would have been just to sensationalize the stories. And I didn't want to just do that. That wouldn't have done justice to those individuals. Mm-hmm. It wouldn't have done justice to, frankly, it wouldn't have done justice to the stories either, and the events, the historical events that happened at the time. We've all seen on the news times when IEDs have gone off or car bombs have gone off in marketplaces and things like that. Those are events, and those are important events that have happened in certain places at times. But those aren't the important things. The important things are the people who've lived through them, and then what have they gone on to do as a result? How have they then remarkably not just survived that event, but they have stepped up and actually gone on to lead and got up the next morning. And a number of those individuals have gone on and they have led a political party or led their community or done something absolutely amazing for their family. And those are the stories I think are absolutely amazing and humbling.
So this is the resilience of the human spirit. And for a bit of context, did you say Iraq was your first kind of foray into track 2 diplomacy?
No, so I went to Southeast Asia first.
Right.
I went to Indonesia and spent 2 years there. And just sort of from chronology, I went then to Ukraine around the Orange Revolution, and then to North Africa and Algeria, and then to Jordan. And from Jordan, I had the opportunity to work in places like Beirut and Cairo and the region, and then got pulled more and more into Kurdistan and Iraq and the region throughout, and absolutely fascinating. Loved the people and the challenge, and being humbled is a theme. It's a theme throughout the book. Yeah. The book is not my storytelling about things that I did. It's really the theme throughout are things that I have learned by watching some of the most amazing and incredible people one could ever hope to meet, and the common thread. So optimizing the moment really is about some of these people and the things that they have done throughout, and some of the common things that I've observed about throughout these truly difficult, challenging times. What are some of the common elements that you can pull out from that, and that we could use today? I mean, let's face it, we live in some very turbulent times, and people are facing difficult decisions. So decision making, whether it's in today's environment or whether it's in a time of an actual crisis, a bomb going off, or some other type of an event, decision making is hard at the best of times, let alone in a turbulent environment. And I would argue that today's environment is a very turbulent environment. I talk to businesses all the time, businesses and other organizations, and a lot of those elements are there, right? It's a lot of the business models don't apply, a lot of the levers that they're used to employing don't apply today. And so business leaders are finding it very difficult.
So in some of your observations that you've seen that human resilience and the ability for, in some cases, I imagine it was a phoenix rising from the ashes. So that's probably a little bit traumatic for a business application now. But we are seeing time accelerating, and you have a very poignant statistic in your book about the number of CEOs who are worried about losing their jobs. So for the frame of reference, given what you saw, I imagine you can take the temperature down a bit and give them tips to actually move forward and overcome these challenges and find solutions. So can you share some of those moments?
So it's why I chose to write the book now, is that looking back over the last 25 years and what I think is a fairly unique set of experiences and a vantage point into war zones and conflict zones and post-conflict zones, and a number of the boardrooms and companies with whom I've had the privilege to work.
Well, some boardrooms are war zones.
Fair,
let's be honest.
That's fair. That's absolutely fair. There's a number of those themes that I think apply today. So the statistic you're referring to is the Fortune magazine survey, where 72% of CEOs expect to lose their jobs, and that's a big number.
Within a short time frame,
within
a year.
Within a very short time frame. And the reason for that is this friction point between expectations of shareholders, stakeholders, customers, suppliers, right? Those expectations are very high, yet the tools with which they have to work, the business models, the levers, talent, people, recruitment, that they're not there, at least not the ones that they're used to working with. So it's a very difficult environment for leadership of companies if they are to hit those expectations. The other statistic that's very much in my mind is from Davos this year. Pricewaterhouse, PwC, had their annual survey, and 94% of CFOs said that their business models will no longer be viable in 10 years' time.
Whoa.
So the actual business models need to change.
Yes.
So what does this tell us? I think this tells us that decision-making fundamentally needs to change. And we need new approaches to doing business. And a lot of this has to do with the very turbulent environment in which we are operating and we are thinking. So I think this applies to businesses, other kinds of organizations, and frankly, our families.
Yeah.
And how we look at the types of options and opportunities that we have before us. So it's why I wrote the book. It's why I wanted to try and pulse on some of those threads of the vantage points that I've had over the last 25 years in crisis environments and really look at those moments. And what are those moments? And being more aware of those moments. And therefore, what can we do around those moments? And that's where the decision-making comes in.
Did you see it, I mean, recent, kind of in the zeitgeist still, there's a little bit of a tail end of the pandemic. I mean, that was essentially a bomb dropping on businesses, supply chains, consumers, everything. And you talk about user experience, customer experience. How would you advise a leader, whether it be CEO of a Fortune 100 or the owner of a small to medium enterprise, which really those are the nuts and bolts of our economies in the West? What would you suggest for them how to be resilient and how to adapt to changes so they can work with it, go with the current instead of going against it?
So there are a lot of things in that question.
It's a big book.
There's probably several themes to pull out there for the next book. I think preparedness is one of them. So, the intelligence gathering piece and the training is what helps us think about, what possibly could. All right. So no one is going to anticipate a pandemic.
Right.
Fair
That's
enough.
just an example, but there could be any.
Fair enough.
Supply chains, wars.
Right. But today, I think I see companies that are so busy scrambling on, that shiny thing that's right in front of them, that they're not necessarily aware of or thinking about, what is happening around them, the bigger picture.
Yes.
And so being prepared for and thinking of and being aware of that bigger picture is critically important. So even if you're a small business, having your head up and looking around from time to time and being aware of what's going on around does give you the opportunity to be a bit more prepared. So in a military context, they're prepared for all sorts of things, and they actually train for all sorts of things.
Yeah.
And when I talk to small businesses, sometimes that's as simple as having a regular conversation with your accountant, a regular conversation with your lawyer, right? And having those professionals on side so that they can help you be prepared for some of those things that are coming down the road.
Unforeseeable events as well.
Unforeseeable events. So when that train does come down the track, or if it comes down the track, you're not maybe as caught offside as you might otherwise be.
Yeah.
For larger businesses, there are all sorts of tools in the toolbox that you can use to be more aware and more understanding of what's happening in your environment. So geopolitically and in the broader context of a market and vis-a-vis your competitors. So in the book, I talk a lot about intelligence gathering. We live in a world where we're inundated with information. That's a good thing and it's a bad thing.
Sure.
It is fundamentally different than intelligence gathering. Intelligence gathering means spending a bit of time and effort to proactively seek out those data points which are fundamental to making decisions about your business or your life for that matter.
Yeah.
That takes a little bit of effort, and so either you do it yourself or you get somebody else to do it for you. But intelligence gathering for those data points, and it doesn't mean thousands of data points, it's a relatively few number, but they have to be done objectively.
Yeah.
The analysis has to be done objectively.
Tough.
Tough, but important.
Yes.
And when I do that for companies and I provide that advice, invariably it shines a light on a path that they had no idea.
Brings a new lens to the table.
But it is a level of clarity.
Yes.
And a path that even whether it's a big business or a small business, invariably it shines a light on things they never knew existed. And they are fundamental data points to their business that change everything. It is so important. So I'm talking about companies where, CEOs and boards will tell you, I know my business. I know my marketplace. We've just done this great plan. Right? And I just
I've been in those rooms.
Yeah.
I've heard those plans.
I've just done this recently where a CEO said to me, give me the answer. And I did. And the path that I told him about, he sat back in the chair and just could not believe what I was telling him. Now, the reasons are the people around him were, I believe, telling him what he wanted to hear.
They were on his payroll.
And, the sources of data were the same sources of data they've always had. They've always looked to the same sources of information. They've rolled up to the same marketplace,
Yeah.
right? It's not objective. The biases are inherent.
Right.
They've always done things the same way, right? So it's information. It's not intelligence gathering.
Really good distinction.
And it's a very important distinction. And so it's not the clarity around, that those data points that are fundamental to the business actually are going to have such a huge impact. I'm talking about a global business here, are going to be absolutely huge. So whether it's a big business, huge company, which are obviously full of smart people, I'm not suggesting anything to the contrary.
Yeah.
It's about the approach. So the optimize the moment approach applies, whether it's a big company, small company, churches, seen it apply in churches. I've used the same approach with governments. I've had the privilege of working with governments, government organizations. The approach is the same. Defining that mission, defining the mission is the hard part. And I'm not talking about a mission statement in the context that some people might think about it, the one that hangs on the wall or is on the website.
Yeah.
That's different. Defining the mission is something you can achieve. It's something that the team works toward and accomplishes. Think about, the general that sends the army off to war. No general has ever sent the army off to war that says, go win the war. That's
Right.
never been the strategy, right? You've got to give, the army, the task. Go do this, then go do the next thing, then go do the next thing, then go do the next thing. I grew up in a business world where the modus operandi was huge stretch goals.
Yeah.
Massive, impossible stretch goals. And then it was management's job to push people, to run around all day and push people to achieve those stretch goals. And, we've all seen it. The phone call in the morning, what have you sold this morning? What have you sold this afternoon? What have you sold in the last hour? Right? They are painful. They are hard. I'm not sure that approach ever worked in the past, but it certainly doesn't work today. In the environment that I grew up in, that's what led to the 50, 60, 70-hour work weeks. Mm-hmm. And all of the associated social problems that went along with it. Because it sure did.
Very transactional.
It was very transactional, and it led to broken marriages and broken homes and all sorts of, crazy bad behavior.
A lot of pressure.
Today, young people entering the workforce, no, they're not motivated.
Not down with that.
Nope, they're not doing it. They're not motivated that way. They're not going to work that way. They're just not motivated to the financial compensation just doesn't relate. So companies that still work that way are going to have to find different business models. Mm-hmm. And I'm suggesting in the book a number of alternatives, but the approach simply is define a mission, something with a cause, something with a purpose.
Yes.
That's going to get people out of bed in the morning that says, yeah, I actually want to be part of that. And if it's something that I want to be part of and I can achieve that success, then guess what? I'll get out of bed tomorrow morning too, and the day after, and I'll want to be part of that. And I actually want to be part of the team, right? So creating the team to deliver on the mission is actually a big part of it as well.
So it's a mission greater than self.
It's a mission greater than self, as Senator John McCain used to talk about all the time.
Huh. Okay, so that is a whole transformational approach to building your team culture as well.
It is, and culture is a huge part of it. There are some great companies, as I've said, that are getting it right. There are many that have a long way to go. I see behaviors in companies today where the leadership think they're doing a good job. There was a survey out, I think it was last week, Fortune magazine said 95% of the C-suite think they're doing a great job with their employees' mental health and well-being.
Oh dear.
The same survey said 68% of employees said their companies are doing a lousy job with their mental health and well-being.
The great divide.
So the gap clearly is, and a lot of that has to do with the culture. So, for example, marketing doesn't change culture. So if a company puts out, some great marketing around, we're going to focus on customer experience. Great, thumbs up. That's important.
Yeah.
Apple, the Apple organization today has thrived and succeeded because they focused on the customer experience. Their design focus, their laser focus on design and making things work, has been that customer focus, their customer experience. But if it's just a marketing thing and it doesn't translate down to the culture in the organization, then they're missing the point. So if they're not training people, if they're not incenting people, and they're not changing the behaviors in the organization, then it's just a marketing exercise.
Yeah.
So if you're still incenting people to sell the shiny object the same way you always have, then you can put out all the marketing stuff you want about customer experience, but you're still going to be selling stuff the same way that you always have. And I see this all the time in companies that I called companies the other day and said, I wanted to do something. And they said, oh, no, we don't do it that way. You have to kind of fit into our, you have to fit into the way we do things. And I said, well, but you said you focus on the customer experience. And they said, well, but we do it our way. And I'm like, well, you're still selling things the same way you always have. And so so I actually think they've made it worse. Right? So marketing that you do something one way and then doing it another now is a disconnect, right?
Yeah, the great disconnect that I think a lot of people listening can relate to this, because when you get to the frontline person in a business, I mean, let's not pick on any company in particular, but we have certain kind of oligopolies around certain service industries. And when you try to get customer support, you don't actually get a human being. Or if you ask a question, you realize you're talking to a bot. If you phone someone, they're not actively listening. They're not giving you solutions to your individual problem. They're giving you a patent set of things, and you feel disrespected in that
Absolutely.
as a customer. Yeah. And the other thing is, I would say in the messaging, I love this. Years ago when things were transforming within the banking industry, I had a neighbor who was, she was very determined to get things her way. And we were all told that now you're going to have to use a banking machine for your convenience. And she went into the bank and said, it's not convenient for me. That's not my convenience. And you know what? They adapted. And she was able to go in and have a personal relationship with her teller. So I think that is a good sign when you are able to take the exception. But can you share some more examples that you've been dealing with in terms of a customer experience? I think you had you have an interesting life outside of work. So do you have any personal anecdotes that you can illustrate this point with?
I advise a number of companies. A lot of them are technology companies, and I think they are notorious for selling the shiny thing. So there's lots of examples there.
Constant change, right? Constant new shiny things.
Constant new shiny things, and I think customers aren't always on the bleeding edge.
Oh, good point.
So while the company, I get it, they invest a lot of money in R&D. They're always pushing to get their new technology out. They always want to be ahead of their competitors, or at least keep up with their competitors. So the push is always on to have the new product out, the new shiny thing out.
Yeah.
But the customers that they're selling to, or want to sell to, aren't moving as fast, particularly if they're selling into public sector.
Yeah.
Right? So governments, whether they be schools, hospitals, state or provincial, right? They're certainly not moving at the pace that companies are moving at, and so they're actually several iterations of the technology behind. If we're talking digital transformation, they're several iterations behind. So they're still trying to get it right from kind of before. So if organizations are wanting to sell them the new bleeding edge technology, government certainly does not want to hear about it, does not want to be sold on the new technology.
Too risky.
It's too risky, but really what they would like is some solutions, please, to helping them make other things just work. And by that I mean they want organizations to come together and partner, because no one company has the solution. They want you to come together in partnership, bring the other 2 or 3 entities together, whoever that is, and actually solve for the problem that they have. And don't just try and sell me something. I think what you're referring to in your question about my life outside, I have horses. I have a little hobby farm. So I have a couple of horses in my backyard. And the problem that I was trying to solve for is that I wanted a fence. I just wanted a rectangular fence to keep some horses in, and I wanted a traditional post and board fence to keep the horses in. I thought this was a fairly simple, straightforward problem to address, but I did the responsible thing, and I contacted a number of contractors to give me different quotes.
Competitive bid, yeah.
And I was, much to my surprise, I got a variety of different responses. I got told, no, you don't want that. I got told, you want this. And this was, you don't want a post and board fence, you want this plastic fence, you want metal fence, you want, all sorts of new and shiny things that, the market's now come out with all sorts of innovative products and all sorts of different approaches to doing this thing. And, I just wanted a post and board fence that was traditional, that fit within, it looked aesthetically the same as the other fencing and, kept my horses in.
Sure.
And so as a result, the prices were all over the place. and vastly more expensive than what I wanted. I ended up going to, I think it was about 7 different contractors instead of the original 3 I thought I was going to have to talk to. But I'll tell you, to your point earlier, I felt disrespected. I felt like people wasted my time. They certainly weren't listening to me. They weren't listening to what I actually wanted, because in this particular case, I felt like I knew what I wanted.
Yeah.
In the end, I did actually end up going with the one guy who said, yeah, I can do that. I mean, he wasn't, I don't quite recall, but I don't think he was the cheapest, but he was just the one guy who said, yeah, I can do that. But the amount of time that I spent going through that process was unbelievable. And I thought, if that's the experience that customers in general have to go through, and keep in mind, this is simple. If my problem, if my business problem, if you will, was in any way complex, this whole process would have been completely ridiculous.
Yeah.
So my sympathy for the customer is enormous, that the process that they go through. Add to the fact that I actually had to add an electrical wire to the fence, right? So there's an electric
Sure, to keep
component to it.
Yeah.
So it wasn't actually one contractor. There actually had to be 2, because you had to supply, power to this thing.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to have to deal with more than one contractor. I wanted one person who could bring, partners to provide the solution.
Yeah.
And the guy that ended up doing it was the only one who said, yeah, I'll arrange all of that. It'll be just one solution, done deal, no problem. Everybody else said, oh no, you have to do that. You have to dig the trench, you have to get a permit, you have to find somebody else, you have to do. So in every other case, it was not only more expensive and more time consuming, but it was far more complex. It was all the onus was on me.
And you're not the professional, you're seeking advice.
I'm seeking a solution
Yeah.
to what I think is a relatively simple problem.
Yeah.
But in every other case, they just made it more complicated, more expensive, and more difficult for me, all because they wanted to sell me the new shiny thing, instead of listening, in fact, to what I wanted and what my problem was that I was trying to resolve. And I just think, as an analogy to the business problems, I advise my clients all the time, listen, right? This ability to listen to what customers are actually saying, instead of selling the shiny thing or the new product or the new service, the new technology that it is that you have to sell. The real opportunity is actually in listening and doing some intelligence gathering around what it is that your customers are trying to solve for, and perhaps what your customers are trying to solve for their customers. And therein lies, the key data points for the actual growth, especially in this world where, in order to optimize the moment, you're going to need that kind of a business model. That's where the opportunity really lies.
And that's how you close the gap.
That is exactly where you close the gap, and that's where the new business model lies.
Okay, Martin, we have to have another conversation because I want to know about that new business model. Can you just give us some information on, I really enjoyed reading the book. I think anybody listening could really benefit from reading it. How do they get their hands on a copy?
Well, it's available on Amazon. In Canada, it's available on Indigo. In the US, it's Barnes & Noble. In the UK, it's Waterstones. So it's available everywhere.
And I think people probably would be well served by following you on social media. What channels are you on?
Pretty much all of them. So LinkedIn and Facebook, and it's MDR Strategic on LinkedIn, and I think it's pretty much everywhere.
Okay. So can we do this again?
Love to. Looking forward to it.
All right. Thanks, Martin. It's been great chatting with you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Heather.
Okay.